The music in this video is brought to you by Audio Socket. They're a music licensing company that offers unlimited access to over 80,000 tracks from about 2,000 different artists. So if you're looking for music for your YouTube channel, Instagram, and etc., you should definitely check them out. Hey there, it's me, Shania, and I'm back again with another video for you.
Shania.
If you're new to this channel, my name is Shania, and on this channel I have loads of sewing tutorials. Some of the tutorials are from things that I've made from scratch, from fabric to finish, and some of the tutorials are of garments that I've upcycled and refashioned. So check it out. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this super cute top inspired by Shein. So I'm going to be starting with this black turtleneck that I got from Amazon, and I'm literally just going to be tracing below my bra, and that's going to give that kind of like cool shape. I couldn't think of exactly what type of shape it is, but yeah, I'm just tracing underneath my bra, and I'm stopping in the middle between the two bra wires. And then I'm stopping at one side, and the reason why is because I'm going to be folding it in half and then cutting it so that it is symmetrical. So the front and the back of the shirt will have two different hems. So the back of the shirt will just have a straight like bottom. And so we're going to take that mark from the side of our top and just transfer it over to the back of our top. You could do it the more accurate way by just measuring how far up the mark on the front comes up from the hem and then just measuring it on the back. Or you could just kind of eyeball it and transfer the mark over to the other side of the shirt like I did. And then from there, once I made that mark, I'm just using the right angle of my ruler to draw a straight horizontal line all the way across the back of the shirt. Again, your shirt should be inside out. Yes, ma'am. All right, so now we're just going to flip it back over so that it's on the front part of the shirt, and we're going to take the two side seams and put them on top of each other so that the front part of the shirt would be folded in half, like so. So you see we have the front part is folded in half, and then the back part is on the other side of the shirt. And you just want to repeat the same thing again, where you line up the side seams and then you just want to flatten out the back part of your shirt. Make sure that all layers are flat, and then cut a 1/2 inch below the line that we drew. And you can see here what shape we have. We can see that the front has that cool shape, and then the back is just straight across. Here I tried on my top, and you can see that it's very loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some darts so that it can really be contoured underneath my boobies and not have this sort of boxy crop top look. So I'm just putting marks right on where my nipple is, and I am just going to pinch the fabric and pin the fabric in the shape of a triangle, and I'm going to stop at those boobie mark or nipple mark areas. And if you don't have a dress form, you can do it on yourself, but I suggest doing it with a dress form because it's so much easier to see what you're doing. So once you've pinched in the fabric, you're just going to trace on top of the pins with fabric marker or chalk or whatever you have. Oh, and you definitely want to remember to trace on both sides of the dart, so that way when you take your shirt off, you'll see that you have a triangle. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to base stitch the darts, and the purpose of base stitching the dart is just to kind of keep the dart in place evenly with thread so that it's easier to stitch on your sewing machine. I have a video on how to base stitch a dart, so just check the description for a more detailed example of what I'm doing right here in fast forward. So when you finish base stitching your darts, you're going to take it to your machine, and you're just going to line up your base stitching thread so that it's right below your needle, and you're just going to do a straight stitch all the way down. Here I'm using white thread so that you can see what it is that I'm doing, but later on I actually end up redoing this with black thread. Next thing I want to do is just take out the basting stitch thread, like you can see I'm doing right here. And as I mentioned, I ended up going back over the white stitches with black thread, but after you do that, or after I did that, I basically just cut off the excess flaps by just using my serger. If you don't have a serger, you can always just do a zigzag stitch and then cut off the excess flap on both darts. Here you can see the effect that placing the darts has. It's much more fitted, but because it's much more fitted, it means that our side seams are now out of place. So I'm just making a mark where the new side seam is, and I'm using the boning on the side of my bra to understand where to place the mark. And then I'm measuring from the middle of the front of my top down to where I want my new hem to be. And I got about 6 inches. So now I took my shirt off, and you can see the 2 marks that I made with my chalk in the previous step. And here I have some sheer stretchy fabric, and I'm just taking that piece of fabric and I'm sandwiching it between the front and the back of my shirt, so basically the middle of my shirt. And I'm really just paying attention to the front part of my shirt because I then want to trace the hem from one mark to the other mark. And I'm just making sure that the sheer fabric is laying flat and that nothing is like crunchy or bunched up, because then the drawing won't be accurate. So right here it wasn't laying flat, so I just lightly stretched it so that it could be flat. Then you want to place a mark right in the center of the front of the top where the triangle points, and then you want to divide that line into 4 sections. And the best way to do it is to just, from that midpoint, you want to divide the left side and the right side in half. And when you do that, you'll have 4 sections. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take this sheer fabric out. So your tracing should look something like this, and you see I have my 5 marks, and now I'm just gonna draw a line about a 1/2 inch below this line. It's gonna be the same shape, and the purpose of this second line is the seam allowance line. And then I'm just going to bring those marks down so that they pass the second line, that bottom line, so that they hang down from that bottom line. And it probably doesn't make sense right now, but it will. I promise you it will make sense later. So now what I want to do is I just want to draw a straight line all the way down to the bottom of the sheer fabric, but just on the sides of that triangular shape that we made. Starting at the center point mark at the bottom line, we're just going to measure and mark the distance of where we want our hem to be, so the bottom of our shirt. I wanted mine to originally be 6.5 inches, but I changed my mind and made it 7 inches. So from that mark, you're just gonna draw a straight horizontal line all the way from one side to the other side of the pattern. Then you want to draw a vertical line about a 1/2 inch away from one side of the pattern, and then repeat the same step on the other side of the pattern. So these 2 new vertical lines will be our seam allowance lines, and you want to just bring down the previous lines that we drew so that they intersect with those new vertical lines that we added. So remember to repeat the same thing with that horizontal line at the bottom. And I just trued out that top line because it was looking a little weird, and then I'm just going to cut all around the pattern. So now we want to use another piece of sheer fabric. Again, it doesn't matter the dimensions because we're going to be cutting it anyway. So we want to take the top of our shirt and put it on top of our sheer fabric, and we're going to just transfer the side seam marks onto the sheer fabric. You want to make sure to really just lightly stretch over your top so that you accurately place the other side seam mark, like so. Now we want to draw a straight horizontal line to connect those 2 marks that we just made. You want to make sure to use the right angle of your ruler so that your line is accurately straight. So at each end of that horizontal line, we're going to draw a vertical line that should be the same measurement as what we measured for the middle of our top to the bottom of our top. So for me, that's 7 inches. And you're gonna do this, you're gonna make this line on both sides. Then you're gonna draw a horizontal line to connect the bottom of those 2 vertical lines that we just made. So in the end, you should have a rectangle shape. And this rectangle shape is basically going to be the pattern for the back of your shirt. Then I'm gonna cut all around the rectangle, and I'm gonna cut about a 1/2 inch away from the lines. And this 1/2 inch distance will allow for seam allowance. I'm just eyeballing it and also kind of using the grid lines on my mat, but you can feel free to draw extra lines on the outside if you need more accuracy. So your 2 patterns should look like this, and here I'm realizing that I actually didn't need to add the seam allowance at the bottom of the back pattern because we're going to be adding the bias tape. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut off that seam allowance. So I only have seam allowance at the sides and the top of both patterns. Then you wanna take your front pattern and you wanna line it on top of the back pattern so that the seam allowance lines for both the front and the back patterns are on top of each other. And then you're just going to make sure it's straight, and you're gonna take a measuring tape and measure from one end of the front pattern and all the way to the end of the back pattern. So mine is 26 5/8. Then you want to serge the sides and the top of the front pattern. If you don't have a serger, you can use your zigzag stitch on the shortest length. So yeah, I definitely see that there is some unevenness in the top of my pattern, but it's all right. The next thing I want to do is just measure a 1/2 inch from the bottom edge of this pattern and just draw a straight line across. And I'm just using the right angle of my ruler to make sure that my line is straight. Then I'm gonna measure the distance between the start of each tick mark to that line that I just drew. And remember that you're placing your ruler along the seam allowance line and not the top of the pattern, because if you do that, you're gonna end up having a 1/2 inch extra, and you don't want that. So you wanna make note of these measurements because you're gonna need them for the next step. So here I'm taking some boning that I got from Amazon, and I am going to basically measure those measurements that I took, and I'm going to cut off the boning based on those measurements so that I have 3 different pieces of boning. In theory, you should have 2 boning pieces with the same measurement and 1 with a different, but because my pattern is uneven, I have like 3 different measurements. And here I'm taking my boning pieces and I'm just lining them up to make sure that they were accurately measured and cut. And everything looks pretty good. And remember that the objective is to align it with the seam allowance lines and not the actual edge of the pattern. So in order to make sure that I place my boning in a straight line, I'm just going to extend the marks down to the bottom of my pattern, and I'm just using the grid line on my cutting mat to just kind of trace where the vertical line continues. But if you don't have a cutting mat, you can just use your ruler and make sure that the line is straight. And then you want to take the boning out of the casing so that it will be easy to sew. So not sure if you can see, but the casing already has stitch lines on both sides, and those are where you want to be stitching the casing down onto the fabric. So I'm just putting the casing down along the lines that I made, and I'm pinning it down in the center, and then I'm just going to stitch on top of those stitches that are already existing on the casing. So the machine settings that you need are here on the screen, and I am using black thread because I do not want the thread to show on the other side. And also you want to remember that these boning pieces need to be on the wrong side of your fabric. And then now I'm just going to put the boning back inside of their casing and just make sure that it looks okay. And you want to just flip it over to make sure that it looks okay on both sides, the wrong side as well as the right side. So now I'm taking my back pattern and I'm just going to serge all around the sides and the top of the pattern. So now that I've serged the back pattern, what I want to do is I want to take the front pattern and the back pattern, and I want to place them on top of each other with the right sides facing. And I'm going to line up the corner of the front pattern to the corner of the back pattern, and I'm just going to place a pin along that corner, and I'm going to line up the bottom corner to the bottom corner of the back pattern and place another pin. So as you can see, it's a little uneven, there's a gap, so that just means that when I am stitching, I'll need to lightly stretch so that the layers are evenly lined up, and I'm just going to stitch along the seam allowance line like so. So here you can see that I am just stitching along the seam allowance line, and when I get to the areas where there's some gapping, I'm holding on to both layers of the fabric and I'm just lightly tugging so that it's flat and evenly laid out, and then I'm just continuing to stitch till I get to the bottom. So when you're done, your two pieces of fabric should now look like this as one piece, and you can go ahead and measure the bottom if you didn't get the chance to measure the two pieces in the previous step. So now what we want to do is we want to take our bottom half of our original turtleneck and we're going to make a rectangular pattern that's going to be the bias tape for the hem of the bottom of our new top. So the measurements for the pattern is here on the screen, and I just added some extra inches to the original length of my measurement so that I could cut the ends of the rectangle at a 45-degree angle. If you don't have a cutting mat, you can just kind of eyeball a diagonal and just cut it like so. And the reason why we're doing that is because when we use our bias tape maker, it'll be easy to insert this fabric into the bias tape maker. If you don't have a bias tape kit maker, you can always make the bias tape manually, and I have a separate video on how to make bias tape, whether manually or with the bias tape maker. But for the sake of time, I'm going to fast forward everything else, and you can check out those other videos for more information. So this is what the single fold bias tape will look like, and we don't want to do the second fold yet until we connect it to the fabric. So with the wrong side of your fabric facing up, you want to take the bottom of your fabric and place it just along the middle of your bias tape, and then you're going to fold the other half of the bias tape up so that it closes or sandwiches the bottom of the sheer fabric in between the fold of the bias tape. So when you get to the side seam, you're just going to press open the two side seam flaps so that it lays flatly, and then you're just going to continue pinning the bias tape all the way down to the other end of the sheer fabric. So here you can see that I left some excess binding tape fabric that I'll just cut off when I'm done. And I'm just going to do a zigzag stitch on top of the bias tape. So you want to make sure that you're taking your time with this stitching part so that you can ensure that the stitching is really going on both layers, both the front and the back of the bias tape. So when you're done stitching, it should look something like this. You can see the nice zigzag stitch. Then you want to fold the fabric so that the right sides are facing each other. Then you're going to pin down the side, and then you're going to stitch on top of the seam allowance line, and then you'll cut off that excess amount of bias tape. So once you've done that, you'll have a tube that looks something like this. When you turn it inside out, you'll see that you have the bottom half of your top. So now what we want to do is we want to connect this bottom half of the top to the top half of our shirt. But first what you want to do is you want to take those side seam marks that we made on the wrong side of our shirt, and you want to just transfer it over to the right side. Then I'm taking the top half of my shirt and I'm transferring it so that it's right side out. You want to take the bottom half of your shirt and you want to turn it so that it's wrong side facing out, and you're basically going to attach the top and the bottom half so that the right sides are facing, and the side seams of the sheer part is aligned with those two chalk marks that we made for the side seam on the top half of the shirt, you're just gonna pin it down. I find it helpful to pin the midsection between the two pins, and this will help you to evenly sew on the top and bottom half together. Then you wanna sew all around the seam allowance line, and you wanna lightly pull on both layers as you stitch. So after I stitched together the top and bottom half of the shirt, I went back and I did another stitch by taking the seams and folding it upwards and then doing a zigzag stitch over it. And I did this so that the seams wouldn't flap down and be seen through the sheer part of the top. So this part is really optional. So if you like this tutorial, then you should also check out the tutorial for this skirt and for this skirt that I made, and I think you'll love, and you can put together a whole fucking outfit, okay?